Welcome back, everybody, to another deep dive. This time, we're diving deep into some listener questions on cybersecurity.
Absolutely. Really digging into the nitty-gritty here.
Yeah, and we've got a pretty big stack of sources to help us uncover these answers,
Yeah.
and I'm already seeing some fascinating points.
Yeah.
Like one expert even suggests aligning your security program with your company's mission statement.
That's a very interesting point. Something people don't usually think about, I guess.
Yeah, not something that comes immediately to mind.
Security, it shouldn't be this thing that's off by itself.
Right.
It needs to be woven into how the company works, its operations.
Exactly. Security is not an island.
No.
So let's actually start there with governance and risk management.
Okay.
One source really emphasized that information security governance is more than just having policies. It's about management having real control over security processes.
Yeah, I think I see this a lot.
How do you interpret that?
So it's really about having the leadership take an active role, not just like setting the rules and then stepping back.
Right.
Imagine a ship's captain who relies solely on charts but doesn't actually steer.
Oh, wow.
That's kind of what happens when management isn't actively guiding the cybersecurity program.
That's a really good analogy.
Thanks.
It really emphasizes the need for hands-on
Yeah,
leadership in security.
for sure.
And speaking of steering, there's a question from you that kind of intrigued me.
Okay.
Have you ever thought about how an organization's mission statement ties into its cybersecurity?
Yeah.
It seemed kind of odd at first glance, but then I started thinking.
Yeah, it's a good point. So many times you see a company, they'll have like their mission statement on the wall. It's all about, whatever, exceeding customer expectations, delivering shareholder value,
Right.
blah, blah, blah. And it's like, but how does that tie into keeping our data safe?
Yeah, where does the rubber meet the road with this?
Right. But it's about making sure that security is aligned with what the company's actually trying to do.
Right.
If a company's all about innovation,
Yeah.
then security should support that, not, stifle it with a bunch of rules.
Right. So it's not just being the department of no.
Exactly. Yeah.
Security can be an enabler.
It should be.
So it's about understanding the company's big picture goals and making sure security is a part of that.
For sure.
All right. So let's talk about the person in charge of all this, the
Yeah.
CISO.
Right.
A lot of the sources highlighted how important their role is in reporting on the effectiveness of the cybersecurity program all the way up to the board of directors.
Yeah, the CSO, it's not just a techie job anymore.
Okay.
They're really becoming a strategic advisor,
I see.
helping the board understand all this cyber risk stuff.
Right.
In the context of the company's overall strategy, it's a big job.
Yeah, definitely high stakes.
Yeah.
There was also some talk about a cybersecurity steering committee.
Oh, yeah, I love those.
What's the value of having one, beyond just having another meeting for everybody to go to?
It's all about getting everyone on the same page, about collaboration.
Okay.
So you get leaders from different departments, not just the IT folks.
Okay.
You've got finance, legal, HR. Everyone needs a seat at the table.
Right.
So that cybersecurity is baked into how the company operates across the board.
So it's breaking down those silos and creating a company-wide understanding of cybersecurity.
Exactly.
Awesome. Well, let's shift gears a little bit and talk about risk, which is, kind of a loaded term these days.
Oh, yeah.
One source brought up the concept of risk appetite.
Yeah.
Can you unpack that for us? What exactly does that mean?
Think of it like how much risk a company is willing to stomach.
Okay.
Some companies, like a startup maybe.
Yeah.
They're going to be willing to take bigger risks, right? Because they're trying to grow fast.
Makes sense.
But then you've got like a bank or a hospital.
Okay.
Their risk tolerance, well, it's got to be a lot lower.
Understandably.
It's all about figuring out how much risk a company is comfortable with.
So it's like setting boundaries, like we're okay with this level of risk, but not more.
Exactly. Yeah.
But how do companies figure out where that line is? Where do they draw that line in the sand?
That's where you bring in the experts.
Okay.
You do a risk assessment, you figure out what could go wrong, how likely it is, and what the damage would be.
Got it.
It's like taking a good hard look in the mirror and being honest about your weaknesses.
So it's not just, burying your head in the sand and pretending there's no risk.
No.
You're actually trying to quantify it.
Got to face it head on.
So you've done your risk assessment. You've identified those weak spots.
Right.
What happens next? One of your questions specifically asks about vulnerability patching schedules. Is that what comes next?
It's a great example of, not just reacting, but getting ahead of the problem.
Proactive security.
Exactly. Instead of waiting for something to break, you fix it before it could be exploited.
Okay.
It's like getting your flu shot. Better to prevent the illness than deal with it later.
That's a great point. It's like building up your defenses, like you were saying,
Yeah.
so you're less likely to get sick in the first place.
Right.
Speaking of being proactive, you also had a question about vulnerability scans.
Yes.
Why are those so crucial, in your view?
So they're like a health check for your IT systems.
Okay.
Vulnerability scans, they help you find those weaknesses in your systems before the bad guys do.
Okay.
And one thing I thought was really interesting, sometimes we think, oh, my data center's secure, we're good.
Right.
But it's not always that simple, is it?
No, I guess not.
Think about all the devices connected to your network.
Okay.
Laptops, phones, printers, even security cameras.
Right.
Any one of those things could be an entry point if they're not properly secured.
Oh, wow. So it's kind of like having a strong front door,
Exactly.
but leaving a window wide open.
Yeah, gotta lock it all down.
And then it makes me think about all the third-party vendors that companies work with.
Oh, yeah, the supply chain.
One source really emphasized the importance of security questionnaires for those vendors.
Absolutely. Those questionnaires are not just a box to tick, They really help you understand how seriously your vendors take security, which is huge because if they have a breach,
Yeah.
it can easily impact your organization too.
It's a chain reaction, right?
Exactly. One weak link can bring the whole thing down.
And speaking of frameworks, there was also a question about PCI DSS.
Oh, yeah, the credit card stuff.
Can you kind of explain what that is and why it's so important?
So basically, PCI DSS is a set of rules for companies that handle credit card information.
Okay.
It's like a roadmap for protecting that sensitive data and making sure you're following the regulations.
I see.
What I find really interesting is that it's not just about preventing attacks. It's about being ready to detect and respond to them, too.
Okay, so it's like a holistic approach to security. It's not just a checklist.
Exactly. You got to think about the whole picture.
But how do you actually know if you're meeting these PCI standards?
Well, you've got auditors for that, external auditors.
Okay.
They come in and poke around your system, see if you're actually doing what you're supposed to be doing.
I see.
It's like having an independent expert give you a thumbs up or thumbs down.
So like an external validation.
Yeah, it's important to have that accountability.
It sounds like there's a lot involved with this PCI compliance. But I think I'm starting to see how all these pieces kind of fit together.
Yeah, it's a puzzle.
You've got governance, risk assessments, then frameworks like PCI. It's all connected.
And we're just getting started.
Well, I'm looking forward to that. But before we move on, I want to hear from you, the listener.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
What's resonating with you so far? What questions are popping up in your mind?
Let us know.
We'll dive into those in part 2.
Can't wait. All right, so we're back and ready to tackle some more of your cybersecurity questions.
Yeah, you guys had some really good ones. And this next batch really digs into the human element of cybersecurity.
Yeah, it's so important, right? Like sometimes people are called the weakest link, but I really like to think of them as the first line of defense.
I love that. The first line of defense.
Yeah, it's all about empowerment, right?
Right. Empowering people to be secure.
Exactly.
But how do we actually do that?
Well, one of the things that came up in the listener questions, and this is something I'm really passionate about, is the idea that not everyone learns the same way.
Oh, that's so true.
Right. Some people, they love to read long documents. They'll pore over every detail.
Yeah.
Other people, they need visuals. They need to see it to get it.
Right.
And then you've got the hands-on learners. They need to actually do it to really understand.
Yeah, the tinkerers.
Exactly. And so when it comes to security awareness training, we need to cater to all those different learning styles.
So it's not just those generic mandatory training videos.
No, those are death.
Yeah, that everybody dreads.
Right. It's got to be engaging. It's got to be relevant.
So what are some better ways?
We'll think interactive simulations, real-world examples, even gamification.
Okay.
Make it fun. Make it competitive,
Right. Make it something that people actually want to do.
Exactly. And there's actually data to back this up.
Really?
Yeah. One study found that companies using this kind of creative, interactive security awareness training, they saw a huge drop in phishing attacks.
Wow. So it really does make a difference.
It does.
It's not just, checking a box. It's actually making people more secure.
Exactly. And that's what it's all about.
Well, that's great news. But what happens when, despite our best efforts, an incident does occur?
Right.
You had several questions about incident response, and one in particular really stood out to me.
Yeah.
It was about the need for a tiered incident response plan.
Yes. So important.
Can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah. So not all incidents are created equal, right?
Right.
You might have a minor phishing attempt where someone clicks on a link they shouldn't have. That's going to require a different response than a full-blown ransomware attack that's crippled your entire network.
So you don't necessarily need to bring out the big guns for every little thing.
Exactly. You need to be able to scale your response.
So it's like a triage system for cyber attacks.
I like that. Yeah, you assess the situation and then you decide how to respond.
Okay, so you figure out the level of response that is needed.
Right.
And how do tabletop exercises fit into this? You had a question about that too.
Ah, yes, tabletop exercises. These are so much fun.
Okay,
So it's basically like a fire drill, but for cybersecurity.
I see.
You get your incident response team together and you walk through different scenarios.
So it's a chance for everyone to practice what they would do in a real incident.
Exactly, and it helps you figure out any gaps in your plan.
Okay, so before the real thing happens.
Right, you don't want to be figuring things out in the middle of a crisis.
No, definitely not. Even with the best preparation, incidents can still happen.
Yeah.
So you also had some questions about what to do after an incident.
Post-incident review, so important.
Yeah, why is that? Why is that so important?
Well, it's about learning from your mistakes, right?
Right.
It's not enough to just say, oh, well, the hackers got in because they wanted to steal our data.
Right. You need to go deeper.
You need to figure out how they got in, what vulnerabilities they exploited, what tools they used.
So it's about understanding their tactics.
Exactly. And then you can use that information to strengthen your defenses.
So the next time they try it.
They won't be so lucky.
Okay, I like that. So you're constantly improving, constantly evolving.
That's the name of the game in cybersecurity.
Well, one scenario you presented was particularly interesting and maybe a little bit scary.
Okay.
What happens if a security incident occurs during a natural disaster?
Oh, yeah, that's a tough one.
Or some other major disruption?
Right. Think about it. You've got a hurricane or an earthquake.
Yeah.
Everything's in chaos. People are stressed. Systems might be down.
Right.
And then on top of all that, you get hit with a cyber attack.
Oh, man, that's a nightmare scenario.
It can be, and unfortunately, it happens more often than you might think.
Really?
Yeah, attackers love to exploit those situations. They know that companies are vulnerable when they're already dealing with a crisis.
So you're dealing with the disaster itself, and then you have to worry about cyber attacks on top of that.
Exactly. It's a double whammy.
So what can companies do to prepare for that kind of situation?
Well, the key is to have plans in place that address these combined threats.
Okay.
Your incident response plan needs to consider disaster scenarios.
Okay.
You need to know what you're going to do if your primary systems are down, if you can't communicate with your team.
So it's like having a backup plan for your backup plan.
Exactly. You got to be thinking ahead.
Well, it sounds like there's a lot to consider when it comes to incident response.
There is.
But one thing that keeps coming up is the importance of testing your plan.
Oh, absolutely. You can't just write a plan and then stick it on a shelf and forget about it.
So you're saying it needs to be a living document.
Exactly. You need to test it. You need to practice. You need to see how it works in real life.
And how do you do that?
Well, tabletop exercises are a good start, but you can also do more realistic simulations.
Okay.
Like you could stage a mock phishing attack.
Okay.
See how your employees react, see if they follow the reporting procedures.
So you're really putting your plan to the test.
You got to see if it holds up under pressure.
And I imagine you learn something new from each test.
Always. It's a continuous improvement process.
You also had a question about the role of automation in incident response.
Ah, yes. Automation.
What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think automation can be incredibly powerful, especially in these high-pressure situations.
How so?
Well, it can help you detect and respond to threats much faster.
Okay.
For example, you can automate the process of isolating an infected device
Okay.
or blocking malicious traffic.
So you're freeing up your human analysts to focus on the more complex stuff.
Exactly. Let the machines do the heavy lifting.
But even with all this talk of automation,
Right.
it seems like the human element is still absolutely crucial.
Oh, absolutely. Technology is a tool, but it's the people who make the decisions.
Right.
It's the people who interpret the data who ultimately determine the best course of action.
So it's a partnership between humans and technology.
Exactly. We need both. And that brings us back to that initial question about the role of people in cybersecurity.
It's a fascinating topic because we're dealing with such complex technology,
Yeah.
but then it ultimately comes down to the human factor.
Right. It's all connected.
And speaking of the human factor, you also asked about the role of psychology in cybersecurity.
Oh, psychology. That's a whole other deep dive.
Yeah, what's the connection there?
Well, think about social engineering attacks, like phishing
Okay.
attackers. They're experts at manipulating people.
Yeah.
They exploit our natural tendencies, our trust, our curiosity, our desire to help,
Right.
and they use that to trick us into giving up sensitive information.
So it's almost like a con game.
It is. It's all about deception.
So how do we defend against that?
Well, we need to understand how attackers use psychology,
Right.
and then we need to train people to recognize and resist those tactics.
So it's not just about technical training. It's about understanding human behavior.
Exactly.
That makes a lot of sense. Now, we talked earlier about the importance of communication during a security incident,
Oh, so important.
and you had a question specifically about that.
Yeah, what to say, who to say it to, when to say it. It can be tricky.
So what are some best practices for communicating effectively during an incident?
Well, I think the most important thing is to be transparent. And
Yeah.
you need to be honest with your stakeholders about what happened,
Okay.
what you're doing to fix it, and what they can expect.
So don't try to sweep it under the rug,
No, no, no. That's the worst thing you can do.
and you need to do it quickly.
Absolutely. The longer you wait, the more rumors will spread.
And that can be really damaging.
It can.
Now, I imagine the way you communicate is going to depend on who you're talking to.
Oh, for sure.
Employees, customers, the media, they're all going to have different needs and expectations.
Right. You need to tailor your message to the audience.
This is almost like an art form.
It can be. You're dealing with a high-pressure situation.
Yeah.
You're trying to manage multiple stakeholders.
And maintain your credibility.
Exactly. It's not easy.
Yep.
Speaking of not easy, one of your final questions asked about post-incident recovery planning.
Right. So once the immediate crisis is over.
You might think, okay, we're good. We can breathe a sigh of relief.
Yeah.
But that's not the end of the story.
Okay. What else needs to happen?
You need a plan for getting your systems and operations back to normal.
Okay.
And that means restoring data from backups, patching vulnerabilities, implementing lessons learned.
So it's not just about fixing the immediate problem.
No, it's about making sure you're stronger and more resilient in the long run.
And does it involve more than just the technical side of things?
Oh, absolutely. You need to consider the impact on your employees, your customers.
Yeah.
They might be feeling anxious, stressed, uncertain.
Right. So you need to provide support.
Exactly. You need to help them recover too.
So it's really a holistic approach.
It is. It's about the whole organization.
Well, and that kind of brings us back to one of our overarching themes here.
Which is?
Building a culture of cybersecurity awareness and resilience.
Exactly. It's all connected.
Your questions have been amazing. It's clear that you're really thinking about the complexities of cybersecurity.
Yes, they have been very insightful.
It's not just about the technology. It's about the people. It's about the processes.
And it's a journey. It's not a destination.
Right. You're never really done.
Exactly.
Yep.
But before we wrap up this deep dive,
Yeah.
there's one more area you wanted to explore.
Right. And that's the future of cybersecurity.
Dun, dun, dun.
What are some of the emerging trends and challenges that we need to be aware of?
Well, that's a great question to end on. Because as technology keeps advancing at this crazy pace,
Right.
so do the threats that we face.
Right. So the bad guys aren't standing still.
No, they are not. And one of the biggest challenges we're seeing right now is the rise of sophisticated AI-powered attacks.
AI-powered attacks. That sounds kind of like a science fiction movie.
I know, right? But it's becoming all too real.
So what exactly does that entail?
Well, imagine attackers using AI to automate their attacks,
Okay.
making them faster, more targeted, and harder to detect.
So give me an example.
Sure, they could use AI to craft phishing emails that are so convincing
Okay.
that even the most savvy user would fall for them.
Right.
Or they could create malware that can evade traditional security defenses.
So it's constantly evolving, constantly getting more sophisticated
Exactly. It's like an arms race.
between the attackers and the defenders.
Right. And we need to make sure that we're staying ahead of the curve.
So what can companies do to prepare for this AI-powered future?
Well, one thing is they need to start investing in AI-powered security solutions themselves.
Okay.
You know, we can use AI to analyze vast amounts of data,
Right.
identify patterns, detect threats that would be invisible to human analysts.
So it's like fighting fire with fire,
Exactly.
using AI to defend against AI.
Precisely. But it's not just about technology.
Right. We've been talking about that all day.
We need to build a workforce with the skills and expertise to manage these increasingly complex systems.
So invest in people.
Invest in people, absolutely. And we also need to foster collaboration
Okay.
within the cybersecurity community.
Right. So share information, best practices.
Exactly. We need to work together if we're going to stay ahead of these guys.
It sounds like the future of cybersecurity is going to require a real collective effort.
It will.
Companies, researchers, governments, all working together.
We're all in this together.
Well, that's a bit of a sobering thought, but it's also kind of inspiring.
I think so too, you know. It's a challenge, but it's also an opportunity.
Right. An opportunity to really make a difference.
Exactly.
Wow, it's incredible to think how much cybersecurity has changed even just in the past few years.
Oh, yeah, and the pace of change is only accelerating.
Right, and we've talked about a lot of that today, from governance and risk to the human element and AI and everything in between.
A lot to take in.
It is.
Mm.
So what are some of the big takeaways you think our listeners should walk away with today?
Well, I think going back to what we were talking about earlier, cybersecurity, it's not just an IT problem.
Right.
It's a business problem,
Yeah.
and it needs to be part of how the entire organization operates.
It really needs to be part of the company culture.
Exactly. And that starts with understanding the organization's mission and goals.
Right. Like we talked about, security shouldn't get in the way of those goals. It should support them.
Exactly. And another big takeaway, you got to be proactive.
Right. Don't wait for something bad to happen.
Exactly. Think about vulnerability management, patching, security awareness training.
Right. All those things we talked about.
All of that helps you get ahead of the game.
So it's not just setting it and forgetting it. You're constantly having to adapt and evolve.
That's right, especially with things like AI-powered attacks on the horizon.
Yeah. That's a whole other level. So any final thoughts for our listeners today before we wrap up?
Well, I know cybersecurity can seem overwhelming at times,
It really can.
but at the end of the day, it's all about managing risk.
Okay.
It's about understanding what your weaknesses are, prioritizing your defenses, and having a plan for when things go wrong, because they will.
Right, because it's not if, it's when.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And never underestimate the importance of having a security-conscious culture.
Right, it's everybody's responsibility.
Exactly. When everyone in the organization understands the importance of security and how they contribute to it.
It creates a much stronger defense.
Absolutely.
Well, I think we've given our listeners a lot to chew on today.
A lot to digest.
From the basics of governance to the future of AI and everything in between, it's been a really fascinating conversation.
I agree. Always enjoy these deep dives.
Me too. And remember, listeners, this is just the beginning of your cybersecurity journey. It's a constantly evolving field, so stay curious, stay informed, and never stop learning.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Thanks for joining us today on the Deep Dive. We'll be back soon with more explorations into the world of cybersecurity and beyond.
Until then, stay safe out there.
And keep those questions coming.